Hello, SKs. Chapter 10 of Charlotte's Web is called An Explosion. Day after day, the spider waited, head down, for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour she sat motionless, deep in thought. Having promised Wilbur that she would save his life, she was determined to keep her promise. And that is a picture of her. Thinking. Charlotte was naturally patient. She knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web, and she felt sure that if she thought long enough about Wilbur's problem, an idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning toward the middle of July, the idea came. Why, how perfectly simple, Charlotte said to herself. The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Zuckerman. If I can fool a bug, thought Charlotte, I can surely fool a person. People are not nearly as smart as bugs. Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. What are you thinking about, Charlotte? He asked. I was just thinking, said the spider, that people are very gullible. What does gullible mean? It means easy to fool, said Charlotte. Well, that's a mercy, replied Wilbur, and he lay down in the shade of his fence and went fast asleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at Wilbur and making plans for his future. Summer was already half gone. Charlotte knew she didn't have much time. That morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Arable wandered into the Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery was carrying a live frog in his hand, and Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair. The children ran for the kitchen. Oh, just in time for a piece of blueberry pie, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Look at my frog, said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board beside the sink and holding out a hand for pie. You take that thing out of here right this moment, said Mrs. Zuckerman. But he's hot, said Fern. He's almost dead, that poor frog. He is not, said Avery. He lets me scratch him behind the eyes. The frog jumped and landed in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. You're getting pie on you, said Fern. And Edith, can I go look for eggs in the hen house? You run outdoors, both of you, and take that frog with you. Please don't bother the hens. Oh, no, shouted Fern. You're getting that blueberry pie all over everything. It's all down your front, Avery. Avery didn't care. Come on, frog, cried Avery. He scooped up his frog from the dishpan. The frog kicked, splashing soapy water onto the blueberry pie. Another crisis, groaned Fern. Come on, said Avery. Let's go swing in the swing. And the children ran out of the house and off to the barn. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the whole county. It was a single long piece of heavy rope tied to the beam over the north doorway. At the bottom end of the rope was a fat knot to sit on. It was arranged so that you could swing without being pushed. You climbed a ladder to the hayloft. Then, holding the rope, you stood at the edge and looked down and felt all scared and dizzy. Then you straddled the knot between your legs so that it acted as a seat. Then you got up all your nerve, took a deep breath, and jumped. For a second you seemed to be falling straight down to the barn floor below you. But suddenly the rope would begin to catch, and you would sail out through the barn door, going a mile a minute, with the wind whistling in your eyes and your ears and your hair. And then you would zoom upward into the sky and look up at the clouds, and the rope would twist, and you would twist and turn with the rope. And then you would drop. Down, down, down out of the sky and come sailing right back into the barn, almost into the hayloft again, and then sail out again, not quite so far this time, and then in again, not quite so high, then out again, and in again, and out and in. And then you jump off and fall down and let somebody else have a turn. Parents for miles around worried about Zuckerman's swing. They feared that some child was going to fall off. But no child ever did. Children almost always hang on to things tighter than their parents think they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed to the hayloft. "The last time I swang in this swing, I almost crashed into the barn swallow," he yelled. "Avery, take that frog out," ordered Fern. Avery didn't listen. He straddled the rope and jumped. He sailed out through the door, frog and all, and into the sky, frog and all. Then he sailed back into the barn. "Your tongue is purple from the pie," screamed Fern. "So's yours," cried Avery, sailing out again with the frog. "I've got hay inside my dress now. It itches," called Fern. "Scratch it!" yelled Avery as he sailed back in. "Come on, it's my turn," said Fern. "Jump off." "Fern's got the itch," sang Avery as he finally came to a stop. When he jumped off, he threw the swing up to his sister. She shut her eyes and jumped. She felt the dizzy drop, then the supporting lift of the swing. When she opened her eyes, she was looking up into the blue sky and about to fly back through the door. Doesn't that look like so much fun? The children took turns for almost an hour. When they finally grew tired of swinging, they went down toward the pasture and picked wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned from purple to red. Fern bit into a raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside it and got discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box and put his frog inside. The frog seemed tired after his morning in the swing. Then the children walked slowly up toward the barn again. They too were getting tired and had hardly enough energy to walk. "I don't know, let's build a tree house," suggested Avery. "I want to live in a tree with my frog." "I'm going to go visit Wilbur," Fern announced. They climbed the fence into the lane and walked lazily toward the pig pen. Wilbur heard them coming and got up. That's when Avery noticed the spider web, and coming closer, he spotted Charlotte. "Hey, look at that big spider," he said. "It's tremendous." "You leave that spider alone," commanded Fern. "You've got a frog. That's enough." That is a fine spider, and I'm going to capture it," said Avery. He took the cover off the candy box, and then he picked up a stick. "I'm going to knock that old spider right into this box," he said. Well, Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte if that boy succeeded in catching her. "Avery, you stop it!" cried Fern. Avery did not stop. He put one leg over the fence into the pig pen. He was just about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed right on the edge of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up and then came down with a slap. The goose egg was right underneath. There was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and then a horrible smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with the terrible gases and smells that had been building up inside that rotten egg. Templeton, who had been resting in his home, scuttled away into the barn. "Good night," screamed Avery. "What a stink! Let's get out of here." It smelled so bad, Fern's eyes were crying. She held her nose and ran toward the house. Avery ran after, holding his nose. Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see him go. That had been a narrow escape. Later on that morning, the animals came up from the pasture. The sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings. Well, there were many complaints about that awful smell, and Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again, of how the arable boy had tried to capture Charlotte, and how the smell of the broken egg had driven him away just in time. "It was that rotten goose egg that saved Charlotte's life," said Wilbur. Well, the goose was proud of her share in the adventure. "Well, I'm delighted that the egg never hatched, she gabbled. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg. But he couldn't resist boasting. "Pays to save things," he said in his surly voice. "A rat never knows when something's going to come in handy. That's why I never throw anything away." "Well," said one of the lambs, "this whole business is all well and good for Charlotte, but what about the rest of us? The smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that's perfumed with rotten egg?" "Don't worry, you'll get used to it," said Templeton. He sat up and pulled wisely at his long whiskers, then crept away to pay a visit to the dump. When Lurvy showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped a few paces from the pig pen. He sniffed the air and made a face. "What in thunder?" he said. Setting the pail down, he picked up a stick that Avery had dropped and pried the trough up. "Rats," he said. "Phew! Oh, I might have known a rat would have made a nest under this trough. I hate a rat," said Lurvy. Lurvy dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, burying the broken egg and all of Templeton's other possessions. Then he picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger. Lurvy poured. The slops ran creamily down around the pig's eyes and ears, for he'd poured it right over the pig's head. Wilbur grunted. He gulped and sucked and gulped, making swishing and swooshing noises, anxious to get everything at once. And what a delicious meal it was! Milk and leftover pancakes, the rind of a summer squash, a couple of pieces of stale toast, noodles from a noodle soup, and the scum off a cup of cocoa. Wilbur ate all of it heartily. He planned to leave half a noodle and a few drops of milk for Templeton. But then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and that Charlotte was trying to save his life. So he left a whole noodle instead of just a half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared, and the barn began to smell good again. The afternoon passed, and evening came. Shadows lengthened. The cool and kindly breath of evening entered through the doors and windows. Astride her web, Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she bestirred herself. She descended to the center of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but steadily while the other creatures drowsed. None of the others, not even the goose, noticed that she was deep at work. In his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the goslings whistled a night song. And while they all slept, Charlotte tore quite a section out of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. And then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads she had removed. When Templeton got back from the dump, long after midnight, the spider was still at work. And that's the end of chapter 10.